Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will continue our discussion of Chapter 3 of Freemasons for Dummies, the philosophy of Freemasonry.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have Craig Graham, who is a member of Kalamalka Lodge number 160 in British Columbia. I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243 in Montlake Terrace, Washington. We have this guy over here, David Colbeth, that's his name. He's a member of King Solomon number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And Stephen Chung, who is a member of Prince Charles number 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia. So thank you all for coming back to our continuing discussion of Chapter 3. We sort of bounced all over the place last time. So we said we were going to start with truth, but I actually want to go back a quick paragraph to relief. There's a thing on the top of page 64 in my version where we say, here he says, we are never taught that good works on earth are a means of salvation in the afterlife. I would argue that there are some things in our ritual that maybe don't explicitly say that, but certainly hint in that general direction. You know, the all-seeing eye is going to judge us according to our merits. The checkerboard pattern on the floor. There seem to be a couple of the prayers that we use for opening and closing that sort of imply that, I don't know if it's an exchange of good works for salvation, but that doing good will please God, and that's a good thing. Do you guys have any thoughts about that, or did anyone else pick up on that?
I guess I don't know that we channel that as a means to an end. It's more of a, as he talks about later, symbols and symbolism. It's not that you must do good or you are a bad person, or that you aren't going to go to whatever your afterlife is. It's just identifying that in your example, the checkerboard, it's just identifying that there are good and there are bad in life, and or good and evil, and that we need to be aware of that so we can guard ourselves and tile our actions, and which then, in theory, according to most common beliefs, will potentially aid in our ascension, if you will. So I guess indirectly, your answer is yes, but indirectly, no. I mean, I don't think that trying to stay on the white squares in the lodge room is gonna get you to heaven. but I think the ideas behind them and keeping you on your moral compass, which is in the center of that image, the checkered life, is what? The altar where we kneel, our book of the law, which we take our obligation on, and these tools that we circumscribe ourselves and keep within due bounds. So talk about stacked symbolism right there in the middle of the room.
A whole bunch of symbolism, but then if we were to be, preaching that, the good works on earth are a means to the salvation in the afterlife, that would mean we are preaching religion, and that's the one thing that we're not doing. We're encouraging everyone to, follow their beliefs according to their own beliefs, and so we just ask that they do have belief in a higher power, right? So no, I would say that nah, that's not what they meant. I think that it was a good precursor to the beginning of the next paragraph, which is Masonic charity doesn't mean the writing of a check. It's more about your time and your and giving a part of yourself. So
in that sense, that ties relief and charity quite closely together then, because you're making an effort to. But I wonder, when we sort of bring salvation into this, I mean, we're practicing in the 21st century ideas that were formed in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century when life was very, very different than it is now. And I mean, I've always viewed Freemasonry as sort of at its heart having a kind of, you got one shot at this, and death is the great leveler, because that's the one thing that makes us all equal. And so, we were sort of born out of a more chaotic time when you could work and provide, but be taken away from your family very, very quickly, and others would have to step in, and in order to ensure the welfare and the continuity of everyone around them, look after them. And that's kind of where my own sort of thinking goes in this regard. It's not about your own salvation or trying to guarantee a place in the afterlife. It's, the grand architect is present at all times, does what he can, but ultimately it's up to us here in the material world to try and keep everything moving forward. If that's, I'm rambling a bit, but if you guys get what I mean.
So I can challenge it. Death is not the great equalizer. I do believe that, if you read a little further on about like the president and the gardener, Freemasonry is the great equalizer, meeting on the level, right? When we meet on the level, it doesn't matter whether you're the president or you're the gardener or you're the lawyer, the doctor, the garbage man, the kitchen help, the server, that level, we all meet on the level. And that's the really cool thing about Freemasonry. I've sat in a lot of different rooms with a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, and that's I gotta say that there are guys who there are brothers who debate or don't always act this way, but Freemasonry is supposed to be where we all meet on the level, no matter, like it says in the book, no matter whether you're the president or the gardener. President wouldn't go over and shake the guy's hand and have a casual conversation on the lawn with the guy at work, but in lodge, we're all on the level, standing beside each other. Doesn't matter, right? So death isn't the only great equalizer.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Craig, that this language and this instruction that we're giving is born out of ideas from over 300 years ago, in theory. And I don't want to groom or stroke Mac's ego too much in that it's ancient language, it's ancient ideas, and there's some among us that might think that it should be modernized. As Matt's hand goes up. And so, 300 years ago, we still thought that maybe the sun revolved around the earth, right? There's different ideas hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we've learned a lot since then. And so are we a little stuck? I mean, I think there's still true and tried principles, but maybe there's some opportunity for new enlightenment or new ideas. And it, I don't know, obviously it's stirring us enough to have these conversations about it, but there are some thoughts that always keep in mind that this is old ideas. Are they still valid?
I think so, because as it also says in this chapter, the 3 centuries, our organization has lasted 3 centuries because of the philosophies it holds itself to, I believe. These things are here by design, right? We're not supposed to talk about religion or politics because it's one of the most two most divisive things, right? And since 2019, I've been adding, we don't talk about religion, politics, or COVID. The 3 most divisive things in society today, right? And there's a reason for that. So sometimes I think, there's room for modernism, if you will, but every now and then taking it back to the basic philosophies and things being done by design for a reason I think it gives more meat to that reasoning.
Well, you know, there's a few points in you can pluck from our ritual as well, where we're sort of meant to challenge and push back against ignorance. And that's, you know, that's something that is, you know, was certainly a strong foundation for the organization back, you know, 300-400 years ago. And when you look at the wacky ideas that float around this society nowadays, it's certainly, I think, even more true and as relevant to the continuity of what we do now.
Well, there are some basic principles to which we adhere still, even from history, and we continue to believe in those. And as if by magic, that's the title of the next section. And as I was reading that first paragraph there in that section, we underlined that it also means we're taught as Masons never to bring anything offensive or defensive into a lodge. There's some debate whether that's always or only as a candidate seeking admission. And we may or may not get into those philosophies, but I appreciated that his ideas extended that say that also means words and ideas and actions that can divide and destroy friendships and institutions. And I guess I understood that, but never thought about it until I read it and then thought, yeah, those can be just as bad or worse than physical weapons.
Yeah, I felt the same way as I read that. It was like, you know, that is so true. And I believe, are more cognizant of the words we bring into lodge, but every now and then I see that it gets forgotten, but it's usually not necessarily in lodge that it's forgotten. It's usually at the festive board or outside the lodge hall. But yeah, I too read that and went, oh, yeah, I got to pay more attention to the words and to the actions.
Yeah. We have our Shrink the Lodge that we do and have discussions. And as I read that, I thought, oh, that's the topic. I know that this show will come out much after our lodge meeting, so I won't be giving anything away, but this is absolutely going to be a topic that we'll discuss. I wrote in the margin, I was curious in regard to those physical things, those swords, knives, spears, guns, and weapons of mass destruction. How do you all handle that in Canada? I at least here more or less. I was thinking about if I asked that to our lodge, how is it decided, or how is a Mason supposed to handle those things? And I decided that there'd probably be at least 4 different answers on whether they can, whether they can't, or how they should handle it or not. I mean, ultimately, our Grand Lodge has said it's up to the temple board, the building owner, on how that, whether, like, for example, carrying a weapon in the lodge, any weapon of any kind, it's up to the building owner, building manager.
I've had that discussion. I've seen a brother with a pocket knife on his belt in lodge, and I said, "You're not supposed to have that in here." He says, "What do you mean?" And so we got into a discussion about it. And he says, "Well, it's not offensive or defensive." I said, "But it could be considered either. And, you know, you're not supposed to have that in lodge." It's one of the first things we agree to, right? And he says, "Well, it's a tool for my trade." I said, "Well, no, I don't see it that way." So, being a dispute, we went to the worshipful master and got a ruling on it, and he was asked to leave it in his apron case in the anteroom outside the lodge room. Right. So, you know, thankfully, well, you know, there's that process of going to a third party right away, right? But yeah, it was a topic.
Could run into a situation where you might have somebody wearing a small knife, and it's a symbol of their religious faith. And if they are an adherent, you know, a practicing and true adherent of their faith, they would probably never draw it in any sort of malicious way, but nonetheless, it's a symbol, perhaps of other things that they might wear as well. What else is I had another example in my mind I was thinking of. No, slipped me, but that's another area of discussion that you could come. Oh, I was going to say people kitted out in proper Highland dress, which is not unusual from time to time in lodges here in British Columbia. Oftentimes, you wear a small knife on your foot called a skin do, and it's issued to soldiers in Highland regiments in the army, and yeah. So where do we go with that part of the discussion? That's
because then it's a part of a uniform.
We can start splitting hairs right down to the follicles too. But that's that's where these things can lead to.
Yeah, that is a good question or a good point, because I've seen that and I didn't even think about it the same way. It's interesting because I saw it as part of the dress, part of the outfit. I didn't even see it as a weapon for either way. Yet when I looked at and I saw that clip on the belt, I looked at it totally different. It's different perception for sure.
I'm surprised that the conversation at that time you're talking about, you didn't point over to the inner guard and say, well, that dude's wearing a sword, and then it sort of just goes right, the whole thing just goes right off the rails at that point.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I found that part interesting too. I made a notes about the weapons and lodge thing because yeah, I know a couple of brothers who I am 98% certain have been known to wear firearms into lodge, and well, yeah, I was wondering the same thing. I'll phrase it that way.
They
So,
didn't have to
Steve,
use as ruffians in one of the degrees, did they?
Yeah.
So Steve mentioned a couple of times the president and the gardener section that's on the next page there, page 65. This is a story I've read before, and I really wish he'd had some citations here because I've read this story several times and I never knew where it came from. I wish he had said, because he says like in an interview. No, I wish he had said in an interview in the New York Post on May 13th, whatever. But yeah, I've heard this story a lot of times, and I don't know, inspired by it is the right word, but I've thought that it's pretty darn cool. So, like I said, Steve's mentioned it a couple of times already. So, is there anything further we needed to say about that block of text?
No, really. I don't know, but this up to this point, this was so inspiring. You guys know I complain about having to read a lot, but this was actually inspiring. It's inspired my last education piece as the district education officer. I'm writing it on the philosophy of Freemasonry. It's inspired me to use this content for that, right? So
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if you find out where that quote is from, let me know.
Yeah, okay. Right, I will. And I know just who to ask.
So then we get back to charity again, which I kind of feel like we've already talked about as the part of the brotherly love, relief, and truth section. We've also, I think we did an episode, or we talked about it a lot, of charity versus love and the different ways that it's interpreted, or at least I've rambled on about it before. That's really all I want, is that people know my opinion. So, so yeah, that brings up the next section of education. Do you guys were there Masonic universities, Masonic schools in Canada and BC? Do you know, or
no? As far as I know, there's the Ashler College, which is online, and now we have different things like the Kootenai Lodge of Education and Research, and there's one Victoria Lodge of Education and Research. These are several hours drive for us, so I haven't really been able to participate in those to find out more about them. But apparently they're meeting on a regular basis to do more education and research topics and things and get answers for people, right? Which I think is really cool. And what's even cooler is that now that they've introduced the Discord server for British Columbia and Yukon, guys like me who, 5-7 hours away from one of these presentations, I can now join it online in a closed format, right? So looking forward to some more education pieces that way.
So yeah, there used to be in the US, there used to be like Masonic colleges and schools that were not colleges and schools for Mason necessarily, but schools that were um, established by Masons for the general public, for as a college or as a high school or whatever, as a private school. I know one of the most common examples is there's actually a movie a couple of years ago based on the orphans school in Texas, 12 Mighty Orphans or something like that was the name of it. But anyway, the point is that there were actually the guy Rob Morris who started Eastern Star taught at the time at a Masonic college in Mississippi, maybe somewhere down south. And there were actually Masonic schools. And I found, well, A, that's expensive to keep up, and I can understand why they went away. But I sort of find it on some level a little disappointing, and on some level probably gratifying that we're not doing that anymore. But I still believe that Masons have an obligation to support education. I know my lodge has a scholarship program, which is a whopping $2,000, but it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. And there are other programs around there.
Well, I'll bet you, considering your lodge is about $2,000 and our lodge is about $2,000, and I know 4 other lodges in our district that do about $2,000. You keep adding them lodges up, and that's a bigger contribution than you think.
Speaking of which, if can my kid apply? Because paying 2 sets of tuition next year is going to kill me.
Right?
Yeah. So I believe that Masonry still does have a commitment to education for the public good, but I sort of, again, Masonry not a charity, and yet I still sort of wish it were somehow better.
But also talking about ancient language and ancient ideas, that was really before the true system of education was in place, right? And so while we hold on to that idea of education for the public, is it really what it meant 300 years ago or 200 years ago or even 100 years ago? So I think things have changed to some extent, or could have changed to some extent. And while it might mean education, again, it could just mean education of its followers, and then we are to go out to the communities and educate potentially. Or again, through I think I don't know, or to go and be active participants in our education system. That could be interpreted that way as well. Or how many of us are on our school boards or active in our school boards and active in our children's daily activities and what's happening in school? We talked about time being the most important thing we can give. Are we doing that, or just giving the money and saying, okay, we've done our job?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that a good blend of both is admirable, right? But when you read further on into the paragraph on education, it's about encouraging the Freemason as he advances through the degrees to educate himself and learn more about the symbols and lessons that are to be taught in the teachings of Freemasonry, right? So, all great philosophies, the faith and the social responsibility, political neutrality, and equality, and finally the equality among members, right? I think that it's an amazing set of philosophical tools to live by, and if it makes the difference in 1 or 2 people's worlds, glad to be part of that. I don't know about this next thing, establishing a new world order. When you become a Mason, are you now part of a new world order? Nobody told me about that. I'm telling you, I think I've been kept in the dark, and it's been 25 years this year, so
Well, Steve, maybe I'll be the guy to enlighten you.
Yeah, all right. New
You're not,
World
you're
Order.
not,
That was a wrestling organization, wasn't it?
you're not a 99th degree yet, Steve. Come on.
No, no, not yet. No. Um, but yeah, there's no question that some people want to take over the world, but yeah, not me.
Well, I
Yeah, what
appreciated
about
I appreciated his section on the kind of the closing area of the symbolism and how symbols and symbolism aren't necessarily the same thing, but they are. But they aren't. He gets off easy because he can just write the book and then close the chapter and he's done, and he doesn't really have to explain himself, like you said before. I wish there was some more explanation to some of these things, but I think that's also the idea of what he's writing, is that intent is to try to trigger the thought process and to maybe go and seek more.
But also, didn't he say something about that this book was meant for a 13-year-old with ADHD?
Right.
So that kid probably didn't get all the way to this part of the chapter anyway. So, you know,
Yeah, there was a I'll tell that story another time. But yeah, it's as he talks about in the second last paragraph, the degrees themselves represent a journey through the three stages of life, and I think that's one of the most important elements of who we are as Masons. That this is a lifetime journey. It's not just something you can read a book or go through a degree or get crowned with something and then magically you are the next thing. Uh, I kind of was explained to me that the rough ashlar is a continuous thing, and then the perfect ashlar only occurs when you die. And so the idea that Craig's concept of death being the grand leveler is really the truth, in that, you know, are we perfect once we die? I don't know. Can't get any better. There's no more changing.
True that,
no,
yeah.
you're actually kind of expressing a worry that I have in a sense, and I've thought about this over the last few months because I've been I've been giving some of the long lectures in the second degree, which I think are some of the most beautiful that we go through.
Yeah.
And recently did a fellowcraft degree, and I did my part, and then I took a few minutes and kind of ad-libbed, because I worry that we go through all of this stuff, and then, you know, like for the prove ups, I could go on about this for quite a while, but I'm not going to. I'll just say what I need to say quickly. We only examine the external parts of the degree, you know, the mechanical, you know, okay, what happened? Where did you go? What was done? What was said? In the first and second degrees, there's these long, beautiful lectures that when you go through, you can just pull an incredible amount of wisdom, knowledge, and beautiful symbolism out. And we go through the degrees, and then unless you sit and watch them or you participate, most times you never really have a thought to, you're not really brought back to them at any point afterwards. And it's a flaw in the system, I think, that I would love to try and figure out some way to rectify in the future. You know,
It's all done in your mentoring program. Get an active mentoring program,
Okay.
because after the brothers prove up, or during their practicing, we dive into the meat and potatoes of each of the things that were taught along the way in those degrees. It's quite funny because we'll meet for a practice night to help them learn the next bit that they're doing in their prove up work, and end up not practicing at all because they've got so many questions about the meanings of this and that and the things that they were taught, because we review the lecture, we review their evening for them, right? And we answer all the deep questions for them. So that's Bob takes great pride in the way he handles the mentorship program. So if you ever get a chance to talk to Bob Goslin, ask him about his ideas and how and why he does those things. And I'll tell you, since he's been doing those things, the guys proving up in our lodge, it's like they wrote it. You can tell that they have passion and meaning and understanding behind the words that they're saying, right? It's incredible.
Well, if
Alright.
the symbols aren't just that, if they're not just objects and there's actually some meaning behind them, then the previous section on mystic magic and Mason Mumbo Jumbo, where he goes into great detail to explain that all the greats, Mackey and Pike and Hall, are just making shit. I mean, making stuff up. Sorry. I got to believe that one.
Yeah.
There, so is the square just a square, or does it really have something behind it? And where did it come from? So depending on how deep you get into the ideas behind the symbols, they may get out into far field, and I think they may be rolling over in their graves, Mackey and Pike and Hall, if they were to read this or understand what he's saying here. But because in the beginning, I was just gullible enough to believe that everything was taught was like, oh, this is real. All this stuff happened. And then as I got through, I wait a minute, this is just stories. These are just allegories. They're not real. And they're meant to teach something. But, how far away from the truth, where is the truth though? How far away can you get from it? I don't know. Where was it to begin with?
And are they trying to teach you a truth or trying to teach you to think a little differently?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because like you say, like they also say, everybody interprets it slightly different, right, in their own way.
Yep.
As long as we all acknowledge that my way is the correct way, we're good.
Of course it is, Matt. Of course it is. Right.
So I feel like we've come to about the end. We did expressing concepts through symbolism.
I think so.
Is there anything else about this chapter that we'd like to put out there before we wrap it up?
I think it was a great chapter to do. I'm glad we did it, and I think there's a lot behind that brotherly love, relief, and truth. And if the Masons that are in existence today remember that and try to live by these things, then I think we're all in a much better place for it. So
there you go. And with that, on behalf of David and Craig and Stephen and myself, we want to thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we encourage you to get in contact with us on social media or on the various platforms on which the show streams. And we look forward to talking to you next time on the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.